do it is I want to introduce Rajat first, and he will set the stage really for what we want to talk about, provide some context of why we are here, and then we'll take it back with this panel that we've got here. Rajat, all yours.
Great. Can you hear me okay? Well, thank you, Rohit. And my goal is to take 10 to 15 minutes and outline three topics as it relates to AI. One is to outline the evolution of AI and bring us to the current state of where are we at today. Of course, what's capturing everyone's imagination today is generative AI, but there's been at least 70 years of evolution prior to that that has brought us to what happened last fall when OpenAI launched ChatGPT. So I'll bring you up to speed on that. Where are we at today? And then also talk a little bit about the future, right? And as we talk about the future, talk both about the challenges, the risks, as well as the opportunities, right? But as you'll hopefully gather, 70 to 80% of my discussion will be around the opportunities, and 20 to 30% is going to be around the risks and challenges. The reason why I outline that is I go to a lot of forums like this, I go to a lot of events like this, where the balance is the exact opposite, right? Everyone is talking about all the fears and the doomsday scenarios, and it's important to have a discussion on those. It's important to talk about the guardrails, but let's not forget what the real opportunity is for AI and technology in general to be a force for good, as opposed to be the defining moment for the end of the world, right? So I'll try to balance the ratios appropriately. So with that, we're here in Delhi. This is hometown in some ways for me, even though I grew up in Nainital. I now live and shuttle between Austin and Chicago. And the reason why it's interesting to talk about AI is because, by the way, AI doesn't stand for America and India relationships, even though artificial intelligence can be an enabler to bringing the two countries together. What's interesting is, in many ways, the whole pursuit of human intelligence and being able to replicate human intelligence, to replicate and model the reasoning and the logic that underpins artificial intelligence, in some way was pioneered here in our country, in India, right? Of course, everyone knows the stories of Aryabhatta and Brahmaputra. The Vedas had reference to, having devices that were going to be able to replicate human intelligence and automate processes. So there's a long history of imagination that mathematicians and philosophers here in the Indian subcontinent have provided, which is amazing. And of course, a lot of that formed the basis for mathematics, but also it formed, which by the way, mathematics is what underpins the algorithms that power AI, but also it underpins the opportunity we see going ahead. Modern day AI came about in the 1950s, in the early 1950s, and there was a seminal Dartmouth workshop which pioneers like Mark Minsky and Herbert Simon and others, who were pioneers in linear programming, simulation models, they came together to form the first generation of capabilities when computational power was less than an ordinary calculator, right? Today, my iPhone, which is version 11, by the way, is more powerful in terms of computational horsepower than the first spaceship that put us on the moon. Think about that, right? So Moore's law, which many of you have I'm sure, heard of, has really unraveled all kinds of opportunity in terms of compute, which is very, very key in unraveling the power that data and algorithms can provide. So anyway, the 1950s saw a lot of seminal work happening. The evolution beyond that initial work with very, very little compute power went through highs and lows. In fact, in the 60s and 70s, the US Congress passed laws to ban some of these advances. It's found a resurgence in the 80s and 90s with what was called at that time expert systems, okay? And there were several research labs that spawned up at universities like MIT, the University of Michigan, Carnegie Mellon, other places like that, but also at private organizations, like Texas Instruments, that had an artificial intelligence lab in the 80s, in the mid to late 80s. They established the artificial intelligence labs. Now, the computer horsepower in that time frame was still a fraction of what we can envision today, right? And some of that early work flowing into the late 90s actually resulted in applications that we take for granted today, right? So when you think about how large global retailers today manage inventory levels, or how they managed large-scale production processes, like in the automotive world, or in large chemical organizations, all of those are leveraging data and algorithms to figure out the scheduling, the planning processes that underpin large global manufacturing and supply chain operations. I've been a student of AI for the last 30 years of my career, and my early work was all in applying data and algorithms to supply chain decisions, right? All the way from decisions related to the overall network design, to production processes, to inventory levels. How do you determine optimal inventory levels? To being able to forecast demand, the first generation of predictions that were based on statistical models. Then they evolved into machine learning models, and now more advanced deep learning and neural network oriented models. Right, so a lot of innovation happened in the late 90s, flowing into the early 2000s, and the bulk of the innovation and the application of AI models beyond the work in the academia was in the world of production, manufacturing, retail, inventory, supply chain, and in the financial markets. Right. What we saw in the late 90s, early 2000s was the emergence of ETFs, so algorithm-driven trading funds that were leveraging data and various regimes of AI to make decisions and automate decisions. We also saw rapid advances in agent-based modeling and discrete event simulation that helped create what today the buzzword is the digital twins. These digital twins are actually leveraging simulation models, which, by the way, I studied as a student to study traffic congestion in the late 90s, right? But they got applied to all kinds of different use cases in making long-term decisions where there was a lot of variability and uncertainty, right? And that's where these simulation models were very interesting. So anyway, there was a spurt of use cases and applications that we saw in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And then the next big wave came with the advent of cloud computing, right? With that, the computational horsepower just got unleashed, and you could have all kinds of new parallel processing architectures because when you're trying to leverage data and algorithms, and particularly big data and algorithms, you are actually looking across a very, very broad search space. So billions, sometimes trillions of different combination, and then you're trying to whittle it down to figuring out what are the patterns, what are the predictions, and in some cases, what are the optimal decisions or the prescriptions, right? So where are we at today? And this is, and today, by the way, AI is embedded in so many of our apps that we have on our smartphones, right? So if you're using Google Maps, if you're using, any weather apps, if you're using a whole plethora of things, if you're shopping on Amazon, for example, all of those are leveraging what some people call classic AI, right? And classic AI is a mix of linear programming, simulation, machine learning, deep learning algorithms, right? And then about 10 months ago, a company that very few people knew about, OpenAI, launched probably the most successful demo in human history, which was ChatGPT 3.5, right? And it was really literally launched as a demo last fall, September, October timeframe. And it captured the imagination of over 200 million subscribers. How many of you in the room have an account on ChatGPT? Okay. This is a highly educated audience. How many of you use it at least once a week? Okay. Great. How many of you use it every day? Okay. So it's very interesting because these large language models, and I'll come back to what it takes to train these large language models, are fascinating because in some ways they're aggregating the knowledge of the world, right? And they're doing that, and then they are providing that to the fingertips for all of us to be able to use in a very conversational way, right? So you don't need to know much about Python code. You don't need to understand random forest models or simulated annealing or deep constructs around neural networks. All you need to do is how to speak English or Hindi or Spanish or French or Mandarin or any other language, any other natural language, and you're able to interface and extract insights, drive, all kinds of decisions and automate processes using these LLMs. And of course, since 3.5, now OpenAI has also, in partnership with Microsoft, launched ChatGPT 4.0, right? Which I'm sure many of your organizations are using, including mine, is leveraging as we speak. And then beyond OpenAI and ChatGPT, there are various other initiatives going on with Google, with Meta Group, which owns Facebook, with AWS, with Tesla, and a whole host of other folks that are all working on LLMs, these large language models that are foundational models. The New York Stock Exchange, by the way, has been leveraging LLMs for the last 15 years to facilitate trading. But that's their own proprietary LLM. No one knew that it was an LLM that was powering it, or at least most of the people didn't know it was an LLM, right? However, what my belief is, where we are at today in the evolution and the application of large language models and generative AI, which initially was used to train text-based data and image-based data, less so about quantitative data, is in the Netscape phase of evolution. Most of you, I'm assuming, remember the Netscape. I don't know if there's anyone in the room who's too young to remember Netscape as a web browser, right? We're nowhere close to being in the Chrome phase of evolution today, right? And I think the pace with which things are moving is turbocharged. I'll give you my, a personal sort of story here. My team at PlanView started leveraging, we got to know about ChatGPT at the same time as the rest of the world did. We were very curious. Our chief data scientist dug into it starting late last year. We mobilized, we prioritized on a bunch of different use cases. We had a hackathon that helped prioritize which use cases to leverage. And we started working on the first use case about 3 months ago, right? And we're going to be launching our product at our user conference next month, right? So the speed with which you can go from ideation to actually productizing an offering is at a whole different level. Because remember, you don't have to train those LLMs. They're already trained by somebody else. In this case, OpenAI, or it could be Google or AWS or Meta Group, right? What's more important is what many of you may be hearing is prompt engineering, is what supplemental data do you use to train these LLMs? And then how do you interface using standard APIs to be able to create this conversational interface? So things are moving very fast. What I'll say is, if I think about most organizations, manufacturers, retailers, distributors, banks, pharmaceutical companies, etc., just any organization, while there's a lot of buzz and hype around generative AI, in my view, at best, if you think of all the different use cases where AI would be applicable, generative AI at best is going to be addressing about 25 to 30% of the use cases, at best. In many organizations, it's going to be well south of that. So there's still a lot of value to be unlocked using optimization and simulation and machine learning constructs, which now are called, in a very bizarre way, classic AI. Sounds like an oxymoron to me, because we're still on that 70-year arc of evolution of AI, right? And we're still in very early stages of adoption. So while there's a lot of hype around generative AI, there's a lot of interest around generative AI, it has a limited, use case. And then the final thing I'll say on generative AI is, while the initial concept was based, the initial, modeling and the underpinning was based to train text-oriented data and image-oriented data, what we're finding is something very surprising. It's actually these foundational models, they're teaching themselves how to do math as well. When my team shared that with me, I was shocked. So today, ChatGPT 4.0 can perform mathematical formulations that will be the equivalent of what a middle school student does. But it's getting better every other week. And I don't think it's going to be very long from now when it's going to start doing calculus, high school level mathematics, right? And the exciting thing about generative AI and that conversational interface is you can still leverage all the advanced algorithms, including optimization models and machine learning models in the background, but make them available, make them accessible through the conversational interface that the generative AI tools like ChatGPT provide. So that's what's really going to democratize the usage of these models. The last thing I'll say is, as we are getting excited as a world on driving productivity and velocity and having impact on society as a whole, clearly there are risks involved with this, right? A lot of the risks deal with, not really understanding how these models go through the learning cycles, who's going to control them, is this going to create too much power in a few organizations? Data privacy issues are a big topic, and I'm sure the panel members here will touch on that topic. So there are a lot of guardrails to figure out, but the analogy I'd like to provide is when us as humankind were transitioning from horse-drawn carriages to the automobile, the internal combustion engine, which, by the way, is getting disrupted now with the EV, we didn't have all the road rules and the traffic rules established, right? It took several decades for the world to figure out what the traffic rules were, right? So as we go, we have to have public and private and government partnership to establish those guardrails, to create that trust, to create the watermarks, to create the governance. But that should not slow us down for making progress, because if 5,000 years of human history have taught us, this quest for productivity, this quest for further intelligence, this quest for improving the quality of our lives is irreversible, right? So as I like to share with my team, these shifts are both exciting and scary at the same time, but I'm far more excited than I'm scared, and I'm hoping that all these advents in AI can be a force for good for the world. So with that, let me transition back to Rohit to continue with the panel discussion.
Thank you, Rajat. Thank you for educating us on classic AI. So I don't know how many times anyone paid attention to the word data that he used. I tried to keep a count, and I lost count after 121, so just say. But the point becomes that as we transition to a panel discussion here, that will be the key thing, to look at data, look at AI, because AI is data used interchangeably. Right. My name is Rohit Jain. I am the CIO for Harvard Business School Alumni Association, and I have with me a very esteemed panel. I'll start with her. You can go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll go.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rohit.
Welcome.
Thank you, Rohit. Hello, everybody. My name is Anusha Dandapani. I serve as the Chief of Data and Analytics Services at United Nations International Computing Center. In this role, we serve all the UN partner agencies with their data value chain, all the way from getting the data, acquiring the data, and processing the data, and also supporting them with AI solutions, beyond AI solutions, or also cloud computing power that Rajat just spoke about. And in this role, we also collaborate with industry and also with academia, and focusing on specific research topics that are front and center for us to address most of our data capabilities. And previously to this role, I used to work for investment banking. In that role, my focus was to apply data science in solving problems such as financial crime, transaction monitoring, and payment screening. And I'm also an adjunct professor. I teach a course in data science. So I'm very thankful for this panel to invite me to and also share my experience. Thank you, Rohit.
Raji?
Good afternoon. My name is Rajan Singh in Nellore. So I've just launched my firm here in India. It's a platform, a credit platform for corporate loans, particularly, that takes the entire corporate processes for origination, secondary trading, retail loan securitization, and make this an easy process, because corporate loans are a huge global asset class, 90 trillion, but they're right now illiquid. So my dream is to make this a liquid asset class. And in terms of the topic at hand today, I just want to set out a framework that might help all of us to think about this. So let's think about the whole topic that we're addressing in three kind of areas. The first area is the major fears around AI that Rajat has so eloquently introduced to us. So I categorize those fears into two areas: rational fears and existential fears. Now, I don't say irrational. I'll tell you why in a second. So rational fears are fears about fairness, accuracy, bias. What's coming out of these models, and how do we judge it? And do we obviously see that there are issues in the way that these models are behaving? So those, I think, are rational fears based on actual observations of things that are going wrong in some areas, and they're constantly getting better. Existential fears are things like, does any of you remember 2001: A Space Odyssey, Arthur C. Clarke book? And in the movie, the HAL computer, which knows everything, does everything, and can read lips, among other things, right? That's the kind of fear sometimes you have about AI. Think about the other Isaac Asimov story about the computer. As computers get better and better and better, man and computer merge. And at the very end, when all of man has disappeared, and all that's left in this whole universe is a cosmic it's called cosmic AC at that point. And then there was a big, large pause, millions of years. And suddenly this intelligence said, and let there be light. And there was light. That is the existential fear. Are we going to be replaced by this all-knowing, all-pervading, all-purposeful intelligence that's going to take over every aspect of who we are? And in the end, I'd like to come back to the question. The entire topic today is also about who are we as human beings and why are we human, okay? And that's artificial intelligence and intelligence. Is that a real dichotomy or isn't it, okay? So that's a kind of fear. The second area is the source of these fears, right? Where are these fears coming from? So one area is about the data. And I want to remind you about Karl Popper and the philosophy of science that says, whenever somebody starts modeling something, they first start with data. But what data, right? What data do you choose to train a model? Guess what? Even before you choose data, you have to have a model in your mind that says, this data is relevant to this problem, okay? There itself is a bias, right? Second, if you have large quantities of data which you're throwing out at this model, some of it may be relevant, some may not be relevant. Algorithms can find correlations, but do correlations always imply causality? Are there hidden factors that's not in there? A and C are both related to D, but not because of A and C, but because of a B that both A and C are related to, right? So the area of data itself is one area where it's a legitimate source of rational fear. The second area is the algorithm. Any algorithm, okay, however structured or unstructured, has an objective function, and it drives towards that objective function. Now, who determined that objective function? It's the creator of the program, right? So that objective function, in many ways, and there may be areas of AI that in fact no longer use objective functions, but that selection of the objective function itself introduces a directionality and a purpose and the outcome, right? And the third area is, how do you test the output of something like this? Now, we hear of generative AI hallucinating, right? Creating things that are really untrue, but they sound extremely plausible because they're beautifully written, right? So where is the human element in the guardrails? In the data selection, in the algorithm selection, and most important, in understanding the results. You have to have the human element that ultimately judges. Maybe someday that will be supplanted. Right now, I don't see it. And then the third area is we can actually think about specific guardrails we can put in each of these areas. But we'll get into that later. That will be the content of the rest of our conversation. Right.
Thank you for that. Just to level set on our timing, I want to end the session today by 5:15 so that we can trek down and see something historic, much more than this session. So I really want us to end by 5:15. So with that, turn it to you, Jaya.
So I'll do a quick introduction and then talk a little bit about specific areas. So Jaya Vaidyanathan, founder, CEO of BCT Digital. We are a risk and compliance player across 20 countries. And we do compliance of different sorts of software that originally started with banking and financial institutions, then moved on to energy and utilities. And we now do a lot of work on ESG sustainability. I've been working in this area of data and AI for about 20 years now. It started with investment banking, Accenture as a founding team in India, for Accenture in India, and then started on with starting something on my own. So I would say data and predictive analytics was kind of the mother of artificial intelligence, at least in the classic sense, and then more the conversational aspect of it. So I've been involved in that journey through 20 plus years, and that's the area. I kind of take off on what Rajan mentioned in terms of specific areas of rational and irrational bias. I think to us, the guardrails are important because it's more what you look at in terms of regulations, either in terms of privacy or in terms of how do you kind of look at unconditional bias, because most of the bias may not be really intended that way. It was just more of the data sets you use to generate those algorithms or sample testing data. So how do we make it inclusive? How do we remove the bias as much as we can, and areas around regulations for different governments. We have 32 different laws that came out, I think, just in 2022. So making sense of all the irrational stuff around it and taking what's relevant for looking at how do you capitalize on the forward energy in terms of the agenda, and how do you make it really a force for good, which means good aspects of social engineering, which means that it's just not it's not a geek platform, it's not something that's just mathematical, but social aspects of applicability and looking at feedback loops, looking at it in terms of, how do you include the social aspect of it to kind of make it relevant, to remove the bias as we go along. And I think you mentioned about Rome was not created in a day. So it's more about, it is a force for good, but like nuclear or any other problem, how do you kind of channelize the right way? And how do different organizations come together for generating this force of good, which is either government, which is regulation, which is the right engineering aspects of it, and the social aspects of how do you have a diverse workforce that points out and says these are the biases, and how do you audit black box audits to kind of make sure that what you say is actually being done. I think those are specific areas we're working on.
Pritish.
Hi, Pritish Nichavan. I'm the founder and managing director of Servant Ventures, which is a venture capital fund. Thank you, first of all, to MR and Sanjeev and Shobha and everybody here for having us on this panel. It's amazing what you guys have pulled off, 26 different countries, etc. Really, really quite amazing. I'm obviously in the venture space. My background has been in technology. I was fortunate enough in the late 90s to start a company which went public short after, called Akamai, which speeds up the internet. And whether you guys know it or not, you're probably using it on your phones and on the websites. So it was an interesting time. I realized the value of being in the right place at the right time with the right team. Trying to replicate that in my career. I think, for me, AI, as Rajat clearly pointed, has been around a long time. I think November 30th, 2022 was classic Silicon Valley, where here, drop it, take it, enjoy, right? And the whole world just woke up and said, whoa, because it became real. It was the browser moment, I think, all over again. My general view is that, unlike social media, which I think in the short term was very beneficial, we all connected with each other, we knew who was traveling where. In the medium to long term, I would argue would probably be more harmful than beneficial. I think AI is going to be the other way around. I think AI will have some short-term challenges. You're going to have 3 elections next year, UK, India, and the US. I'm just fascinated to see what all comes out and how much fake news we'll have to really filter through. But I think in the long term, the benefits of AI are going to be enormous. I think it'll change the way we live. I think it'll change the way we work. Rajat asked a great question about ChatGPT. Let me ask you guys, how many of you use it for personal use? Professional use? So I think you're going to see a lot more professional use of ChatGPT or LLMs than personal use. How many of you remember that the press and everybody in December and Jan was saying Google search was dead, right? I don't think it was, right? So OpenAI is not replacing Google search. So I think let's step back and say this thing is going to take a long time to develop. We are in the really, really infant stage of where we are. It's a lot of hype. My own industry in venture capital is very guilty of this hype. Giving companies, my least favorite word is unicorn, unicorn valuations with no revenue just because you have a generative AI business plan is just it's not valid. And I think when all is said and done, money will be made in 2023 in generative AI, but more money will be lost than made. So I think, we're really in the very early stages of this development. I think it's very important for us to understand that this can be a force for good. But if you don't have humans in the loop, if you don't have policymakers and regulators, I'm not suggesting that policymakers and regulators will be ahead of technology. It's never happened and it's not going to happen. But in this particular one, I think they're going to have tried really hard to make sure that countries are working together, companies are working together to use this in the right way. Now, One last point I'll make on the singularity, which of people that you know, is that when machines become more intelligent than humans, I don't believe it'll happen in my lifetime, but Ray Kurzweil, and who's much smarter than me and much smarter than 1,000 of me together, thinks it'll happen by 2030, right? So who knows where this is going? But I think, we just have to make sure we have the right person. I think Sam Altman and Sundar and Satya and all these guys are responsible guys. But you can get something in the wrong hands, right? And you might be somebody, not Elon, but somebody like Elon who decides, you know what? Every Tesla is going to turn left because I feel like it, right? And so I think we're going to have real guardrails around that to make sure that it's contained.
Thank you for that, Pritish. So you talked of policy, and let me turn to Anisha about policy. And you do a lot of work, obviously, at the UN. Any thoughts on how you approach political decisions and you look at data across the world?
Thank you for leading into that question. Yeah. So there is interesting topics and interesting buzzwords that's thrown around. The thought process when it comes to public sector or organization like us, the UN, see, for us, it's more around incorporating the human oversight and then also making sure the AI models that we are building, whether be it for the decision-making process or we are making sure that we are involving human operators in the review process, not only in the review process, also to make sure that we are approving the critical decision workflows that is embedded in these models, yeah? So the bias is going to be the front and center for us to address when it comes to promoting fairness and inclusivity of these AI models. But there is this concept that I would like to bring about to this panel and also to the audience here is that it's more about not just about the guardrails, it's about the guide rails. That is what everybody is looking for. When I say guide rails, what I'm referring to is about the guidelines of how these AI models and the AI systems are being designed, developed, deployed, and also being used is something that needs to be understood very well for us to define what are those guidelines that needs to be applied to these use cases. See, end of the day, when we were talking and when we were discussing, AI is like a sword. Sword can be used to slice an apple and also kill a person. So it's about for us to be using the sword with the pragmatic reasons of how to use a sword, where to use a sword, and also having this thought process around how are we employing these AI use cases to tackle these challenges is very important. For example, making sure that we are involving diverse participation and representation of data at the data collection stage itself, because to making sure that the diversity and inclusion is incorporated in how these models are being sort of fed with data. The models perform well the more the data that you feed to these models. We want to make sure that the data is a well-representative data. And the second of all, what we need to make sure is not only identifying the bias, we also need to think through how do we want to mitigate the bias. Bias detection is one key, but mitigating the bias is something that we need to think ahead of time when we are building out these models. And the third process that we need to keep in mind is the ethical pre-processing of this data. What the ethical component that we consider as important is that identifying and involving the right stakeholders when we are training these models is a very, very important key to keep in mind. And the third one, as you said, Elon Musk can decide what the Tesla would do. The fairness-aware algorithms is something that we need to keep in mind. What we mean by that is during the training process itself, we need to keep in mind how are we going to continuously monitor, how are we going to continuously audit, and also making sure that there is a shared responsibility when it comes to us deploying these AI systems. It doesn't matter for the public sector, and also for your private use. So end of the day, this is AI use cases are evolving. AI has been there with us for quite some time.
Right. And when we were talking earlier, you said you've been obviously using AI in your previous life. Yeah. To build on that, when you started hearing the buzzword AI, what was your reaction?
Oh, we're already doing that,
Exactly,
right? So
right.
that's what, if it means data, if it means predictive analytics, if you say that past presence represents the future, if you're actually saying I'm looking at optimal models for it, I'm using machine learning, we were already doing all of that. Because if you kind of like even take something like a lending or an NPA kind of a platform, right? What you would do is that you're training it. You're saying, don't tell me after I've had a heart attack that I have had a heart attack. Tell me what were the leading signals to say that I'm going to have a heart attack in three years. That's useful to me. So we call that classic AI, but we didn't even call it AI. We just said predictive analytics, we said optimization, we used words that you used where we said we're using machine learning models, we said we would kind of take data that you've been using elsewhere, you've seen on these platforms later on.
Right.
So it morphed as something the past predicts the future, and this is the best manner in which we're going to do that. And then we started adding elements to it. It was more like, this is the core. Now let's look at when social media became popular. We said, let's look at behavioral analysis on the web and take that into critical lending decisions, for example. Or we would say the commodity prices predict what's going to happen in this landscape. For COVID, for instance, we kind of said quantitatively, if vaccines are introduced at this stage, what's going to be the impact? We just called it, we didn't have the word AI attached to it.
Right.
Then when we became darlings of Silicon Valley, it was more like, how do we kind of like make it more cooler? And then we say, oh, we are doing AI today, and here are the elements of it. Now we want to be more darlings, but more like they throw more money at us. So we are saying we're using generative AI, but we were always doing that. It was more about the context of how you bring in the interface with others. You ask the dumbest questions possible and you get the answers. I mean, that to me is something that is more towards the future of AI and where it's getting. Make it accessible, make it easier. And that's something that we gave it to a select group of users earlier. The credit officer, for instance, could ask the questions. Where do you think this is going to be? Who should I lend to? Do I have more of a focus on particular industry? Or you asked those questions and you got the answers. But that was kind of like a specialized sign-on. Now if you say, I'm going to open it to everybody and they can kind of figure out what's the best way to do something. Now that's the difference, but it was always there. It's not a new phenomena. It's just that because we want to attract and be darlings of the Wall Street, we kind of put more buzzwords and then we are cooler and we get more money. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where it goes.
And we saw that, right?
Yeah.
November 30th, ChatGPT comes out. December 1st, LinkedIn was flooded with AI experts. Yeah, it was true.
Yeah.
And I saw that personally. By 1st of January, every company that I could ever think of was using AI to do everything, right? Everything under the sun.
Yeah.
They used the holidays to kind of get up to speed on AI, and it happened. But, she talked a lot about lending, and that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right?
So in fact, many of the things that you're saying, many of the things you're saying, Jay, was in fact sending off sparks in my head as well. So, for example, you said, we told our relationship managers, who should we lend to? Before you can ask the question, who should we lend to, that entity to which you're asking the question needs to know, or for example, are we lending too much to one sector? That model needs to know, or the algorithm needs to know, that concentration of sector leads to disaster in the end. Now, who tells that model that thing? There are two ways to do it. Either you give it specific instructions about how to calculate concentration and the risk effect. Okay? We don't call it AI, but that's what it is. Or you throw a lot of data at it about companies that had very concentrated portfolios and ones that didn't. And it figures out that those that had concentrated portfolios are not around anymore, right?
Yeah.
Then it figures it out. So whatever we do, we're kind of doing the same thing again and again, but in more and more and more sophisticated ways. It's really about pattern recognition. And what is pattern recognition? Pattern recognition is having a model of the universe somewhere that says this is how the universe should respond, and then checking if the universe does in fact respond that way, and if it doesn't, you course correct. That's a feedback loop. These are classical techniques, to Jaya's point.
Yeah.
This is nothing new. These are in fact the techniques by which we learn, right? So learning itself, the very process of learning, has a certain logic to it. And now these tools are giving us that logic in a less and less structured way. Our inputs are more and more vague. And its computing power is kind of replacing some of the intuitions that we would actually add to the model. So in that sense, we can always build into these models the societal objective that you want to achieve. That's the stage at which you can introduce those things. For example, in the data that you throw, make sure it has gender diversity and race diversity and income diversity data, not only one region data. In the algorithm itself, throw in the right kind of objective function, right? And once you get the data out, make sure they're human eyes looking at the outcomes, because there is, after all, ultimately a judgment about good and bad. And that's at the very end. So guardrails, guide rails. Fortunately, guide rails also guard. So,
I think just to add to that lending comment, I think the ethics of it is what you can't replicate. Because you can say this is an outcome that relates to that, but you can't put an ethics into a machine. I think that's the part that's going to be the most challenging of it. And an interesting use case when it wasn't still called AI was when demonetization happened in India. Pretty much we were kind of got requests from every quarter. They said, find out what's going to be the devastating impact on certain industry versus others. And what's the model? What's the recovery rate? So this is kind of like something, today you would call it AI. And when you give access to a lot of people to ask the questions, it just becomes generative AI. So just wanted to end up with that.
So Pritish, I know you and I were talking about something similar, that as companies come to you for funding and they don't have AI in their deck, would you look at it?
Well, I'm looking for a non-AI, local, non-mobile company. No. But look, I think AI is just overused right now. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So, to me, hey, Carl. So one of my CEOs is here, and Carl used AI, many years ago,
right? Yeah,
right? So I think the concept of AI, which is, and Rajat, is your software gets better with more data. Yeah. If your algorithm is not getting better with more data, then you don't have an algorithm, and you don't have a company, right? So I think that concept has always been there. What it's done is this has made it available to the masses, right? I think that's what it's done, right? Yeah. So we are looking for, for my companies, how does AI help you to generate more revenue, not cut costs, right? Leading companies, if you talk to McKinsey and Goldman, all the experts, the best companies are looking at how can I increase revenue. Let me give you an example. If you go to and you get Office 365 today, it's $8 to $22. If you add ChatGPT to it, it's $30 per user per month. Okay, so more than 4 times the cost of the actual software is just adding ChatGPT, right? I'm sure Rajat is thinking, how can I get more money out of this? Not how can I cut costs, right? So the best companies, that's what they're going to do, right? The best companies are thinking, how can I reskill 30% of my workforce? The average company are thinking, how can I cut 30% of my workforce, right? So, we are all so paranoid about what this does to the enterprise. I think, as I said before, this is going to create, positions and jobs that we could imagine. Old timers like me will remember the PC was supposed to kill all jobs, wasn't it? Right? Yeah. I don't think that happened. So, if anything, the economy has grown. Similarly, it's going to happen here. Well, if you're really scared about AI, then make your children plumbers or gardeners. Right. And the best plumbers and gardeners will also be using AI, right? So I think, there's no way out of this thing, right? So we all have to sit here and learn how to embrace it. To answer again the question, yes, every plan has AI. People who hear Y Combinator, 80% of the companies after November 30th became generative AI companies. And so my question to them was, what was your business plan November 29th? Let me know that, right? Then let's talk about what your business plan is today, right? So this is the hype that Silicon Valley is really good at. 3 years ago, it was crypto. I think this is not going to be like crypto. I think this is a lot more real. Good luck if you bought NFTs. But I think that this is much more real. But Silicon Valley has a really short memory. We lost hundreds of billions of dollars in crypto, and people are just doing the same thing again. However, as an investor, as an entrepreneur, we have to embrace this. I've seen 6 technological revolutions in 30 years. Almost some of us have, right? We saw the internet. I mean, I landed up in the US, I didn't even know what email was, right? Internet, then we saw the browser, then we saw Google, then we saw the iPhone, then we saw the cloud, and now we're seeing AI. Each of them has made our life completely different and better, I think.
Right.
So I think all we have to do is, yes, we have to do everything that you're saying. We have to have guardrails and guide rails. But, man, it's exciting.
You forgot there was something called metaverse as well in between.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But only one company spent money on it.
Yeah. So
We also
want-
missed out on talking about quantum computing and
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
moving into a space that
Right.
the computing has never been there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he talked of a very good point of upskilling, right? So from your vantage standpoint, what do you all think of upskilling across the world?
See, our educational system has to become a little bit more agile. Making sure that we are not only teaching our younger generation and the upcoming generation on not only thinking through the problems, but also problem solving. Bringing in the AI as part of the curriculum kind of makes the awareness away from the fear that you spoke about, Rajan, the point here is, the more we move from the unknown space to a known unknown space, it kind of makes the sort of awareness and the upskilling programs kind of embedded into our curriculum, makes it easier for us to live in a generation where AI is part of our life. It is enabling our life. The thought process around these AI solutions is no longer just about introducing the human-centric design or the human in the loop. Also, the thought process around building solutions which are co-piloted solutions, in the sense that these AI solutions needs to be built around with the thought process that they are co-piloting a human in the decision-making process. It doesn't matter the workflow of what you are currently focused on, which industry that you're focused on. Imagining having a co-pilot AI as your surgeon, or a co-pilot driver as your Tesla driver, or also having a co-pilot, somebody who can teach your child or your younger generation sort of in a way that they can be more aware of what AI can do and cannot do, kind of the generational disruption the educational system will need to sort of come about. And I think the future is so bright, because it's not just at the light at the end of the tunnel. Our younger generation are more AI aware than how aware we were in the past. And I think alternative educational systems are going to evolve as AI use cases, and they are going to evolve at a scale. That's how we are seeing it.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'll open it up to the audience because I want to keep it a little interactive. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So someone mentioned
You want to use the mic?
You mentioned about AI not having the ethical component of it. So I was thinking, if you throw enough case studies and cases and data at them on what's happened in the past, would they not then learn themselves and do that? I mean, I'm thinking something like pulling, for me in the healthcare field, pulling the plug on a patient, right? Because they're not showing brain activity or something. And if you put all that data and say, now give me an answer, would they say, well, he's 17 and he's an athlete and you should wait for him to recover, or you should pull the plug?
See, data is not rational. I mean, data is rational, humans are not. So I think it's more about when you say ethics of it. You may say this is going to be something that you pull the plug on. Whereas if it's your own family member, you think about it. So there is an element of judgment call on certain things, which takes away the ambition. Is it right to kind of pull the plug on? If you said there's an AI machine without human intervention that's going to pull the plug on when the parameters follow below a particular factor, would you let the AI machine take the judgment call for you? The answer is absolutely not. Because one, it's not the right thing to do. Second, you would be put in jail if you actually said that's the thing. You know, now there's this whole conversation about the copyright of the monkey. Is that the monkey's copyright, or is that Oh, you didn't read? It's a very interesting article. Monkeys took selfies because somebody created the software for them to take the selfies. But is that the property of the monkey or the one that created that? So when you go behind the ethics of this whole component, I think it comes down to, I have all the data that I want. Is that good enough to make that decision? That is the ethical component of the right thing. Yeah, I know Pritish said, I'm going to take that question.
No. I said after you. After you. I think ethics is one thing and inaccuracy is another.
Yeah.
Let's call it, see, Americans are superb at marketing. They say that the models hallucinate. No, the models are wrong. Okay? They are wrong many times, right? So for question is, your example, how do you know that they are right? Because if you get it wrong one time, when a person is taken off a life support system when they shouldn't have been, that is bad, right? If you're bail or parole, let me give you another example that is talked about, right? If you have a system telling you where somebody should be put on bail and how much should the bail be and what should the parole, what if it's wrong? What if that person goes and kills somebody else, right? What if it's a power grid and you're deciding what the power grid should do and a whole area loses power just because it does something wrong? So all of these is a combination of ethics and just being plain wrong.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I go further, Shekharan? And then I'll go to Carl next.
This is not meant to be a divisive question, so I want to frame that. I have a real concern about AI that I didn't have with regard to a whole lot of the other evolutions that we have seen in the last 20 years. And it is that in economies like India, where we are not so much we should be worrying about unemployment in general, but we should also worry a lot about underemployment and redundancy, that this notion that somehow we will upskill and replace the jobs may not hold true. I worry about AI because it does, in fact, produce, assuming data and algorithms work, a revolution in terms of replacement of a whole lot of jobs that today are, in fact, jobs that where not only one person in India works, but 4 work where 1 is necessary. So I guess my question is, the humane part of this, we talk a lot about ethics and we worry a lot about criminality and so on in AI. Let's also talk a little bit about the moral question of how quickly it's executed, how much impact it has, and how do we mitigate those impacts. Because just this somehow magical upskilling may not happen here fast enough to avoid some social disasters.
Go ahead.
Absolutely valid point, because in a country like India, we have somebody to press the elevator button. So that's employment for them. So I think that defeats, like, why wouldn't somebody press a button kind of a thing, right? But classically, AI, by definition, is not supposed to replace humans. It's supposed to take them beyond what a human being can do. If I have 3,000 data points as a human being, I can't take the decision on what to do that's right, because it's just too much information. How do you make a pattern out of it and give it to me in a consumable form was the original definition of classic AI, which said, here is something you can't do, but here's what I'm providing you on a platform for you to do. So it was never saying that, it's a commoditized, that wasn't the original intention of it. It will result in job losses. That's the hard fact, because somebody that's doing a repetitive portion of work, it is going to result in it. Is that the right thing to do? Can we upskill them fast enough? I think that's a question of a lot of different components coming together in a country like India, which is beyond the realm of just technology. But can upskilling happen fast enough? Maybe not, but what do we do with them? How do we kind of use them? So it's more about governmental intervention, reskilling, in terms of like NASCOM, skilling platforms that actually put that into the curriculum? How do you kind of get them fast enough at the school level, at the college level? So it's a range of emotions that goes beyond the question of how do you use them. So I just wanted to make a comment on the original purpose of it, but I can let...
No, I just wanted to have Carl also ask his question.
Yeah, well, I just have a quick comment on your question about can enough data help drive ethics in AI. So before this AI became a big thing, there was an old book called Wisdom of the Crowd. I don't know if you guys have read it, but it's really simple common sense that the wisdom of the crowd can give you a good inference for the best Thai restaurant that you may be looking for. But, and let's say there's 1,000 data points, and just having more data points can help you there. But if you are looking for a cardiologist for your family member, would 1,000 data points help you, or even just one data point from your friend or from your family member who has actually got an heart operation done through that cardiologist will help you? So just more data doesn't help the models to get better when it comes to ethics and certain areas. The second point is about can AI evolve into human consciousness? Because a lot of things that we are talking about in terms of this whole ethics and morality and all that, ultimately, the humans have evolved and we are able to do the smart things, and most of the time we are able to make some right decisions is because of also not just intelligence, but a higher level of intelligence, which is consciousness. And there's a lot of research that is currently now just starting to happen, which is saying going beyond AI, going beyond intelligence, which is consciousness. Once we get to that level, maybe we might be able to derive some ethics, but just throwing more data is like garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah. Carl, just one postscript to what you just said. My own personal touchstone of when we reach that point, when it truly becomes like human, is can an AI program lie, and lie consciously to deceive, That's kind of my intuitive way of saying, is this truly conscious, okay?
Just to add on to the question that you had, Shekhar,
Sure.
very quickly, I will take only 30 seconds. Just to walk back in history and just to understand how it was when the times were when we didn't have refrigerators at home. When the refrigerators were introduced or invented, they were also sort of disrupting the industry of food. And the food that was made could be preserved. It could be stored. It could, the longevity of the food, the frozen food, the evolution of having Pepsi and Coke, these are the kind of things that would come about by having AI as the new disruptive platform. So where I see the new jobs that will evolve, where not just upskilling and making our younger generation aware of what is AI will also create new jobs in the market that never existed before.
Yeah, and I think nobody has the answer to your question, honestly. Nobody does, right? Yeah. But I'll give you an example. Do you know what the biggest crisis in New York City was in 1906? Horse manure on the streets. Mm-hmm. And then what happened? Cars, right? So, we just don't know where this is going. All we have to do is that make sure that we have the policies, and this is a government plus private, it's a public-private thing, to ensure that we are being nimble enough, and I worry about that a lot. I do, especially in a country like India with the population base. I don't think there's a clear answer. I think the real customer support, the coding, those kind of things are going to be completely disintermediated by AI. Completely, right? We know this already, right? So, these things are ripe for disruption. So I'm hoping that the incumbents, and I know, the founder of Infosys was here, I think he just left, how are they going to really evolve? The other thing about this particular innovation, and I'm sure Rajat will agree with me, that's different. When mobile or Google and all the search engines came out, startups had the advantage over bigger companies. In this particular one, bigger companies have the advantage because they have the data already. And so it's very hard for a startup to start competing with a bigger company. Microsoft has the biggest advantage in coding right now because of GitHub. They have all the code in the world, open source code sitting there. Who can compete with that? No one. No startup can, right? So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how the incumbents actually react to this as opposed to smaller companies.
We've got time for just maybe 3 questions, and then I'll want a closing comment so that we can go see a historic event. Go ahead, Murli.
Yeah, hi. Rajat, as much as you wanted this session to spend 80% on discussing opportunities, and
I think I miserably failed.
right, so I'm still waiting for that session. So we got scared enough, and not only that, precursor this morning when somebody told me that 11 million jobs with repetitive nature or customer support will be, completely going to vanish in next 3-4 years. I'm just waiting to see here what are the new jobs this AI is going to create, what opportunities that exist. And particularly, it is so scary for me because I run a social enterprise that providing jobs in underserved communities with IT and BPO jobs. So where I need to spend time to reskill the people and create new focus on the
If I can take 30 seconds on this.
Go ahead,
So couple of things, right?
I'll come to you next.
Everyone is fearing that job losses will happen, and I agree with the comments made that there are some known unknowns and there's some unknown unknowns as well in this whole world. But the reality is the bulk of applications today that are leveraging AI are supporting humans as opposed to replacing humans, right? So GitHub, my team is using GitHub in software engineering. It's leading to productivity improvements anywhere from 15 to 40%. But am I trying to get rid of my software engineers? No. I want them to move their roadmaps even faster, right? So we need to keep that in context, that this will help us solve the world's biggest problems. It'll help us bring technologies and capital and provide access to the remotest corners of society, right? There's well-documented use cases right now where farmers in the remotest corners of villages in India are accessing capital that the government is making available and organizations are making available because they're able to interface through their smartphone in a very conversational way in Hindi, right? That is a force for good. It is not replacing any job. It's actually allowing entrepreneurship to come to that farmer in a village like Bilaspur, for example, right? Now, there will be a subset of jobs that can just be automated, right? And just like the same horse-drawn carriage to internal combustion engine transition, there was a whole value chain around stables and food for horses and the manure cleaning. Guess what? Many of those jobs disappeared, right? There will be a generational change in many jobs disappearing, right? But the kinds of jobs that we'll need more of. Today, I can't hire enough data scientists. I can't hire enough data architects, right? There'll be so many new opportunities for us to harness the knowledge and the data and to bring about new applications and new use cases that we're not even envisioning today. When I was in college, we had not envisioned Google Maps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That wasn't very long ago, by the way. And today, I can't imagine going by a single day not using Google Maps. Yeah. So there'll be applications that'll be coming that'll create new jobs and new opportunities. And look, this is the paranoia that has persisted society for 5,000 years. With any new big forward-leaning invention or any new technology.
Rajat, I'll have to, yeah. So one last question, sorry, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
I do not have a question. I totally agree with Rajat, and I have a case to prove his point. So there is a startup, actually an NGO, who was working in this domain where they educate rural women on finance. So they made a program, but no one from that village was engaging with the program, even when it was in their own language. But what they did, they placed AI systems on every chopal where people from the that village used to meet in evenings and chit-chat. The AI helped this program to learn their local dialect and the keywords they used. And then they say a great improvement in the rate the local women engaged with the program. that's how we can use here at the grassroots level.
Thank you. We've got 1 minute. So describe the future in one word for AI. And it applies to everyone. Sadly, you don't get
It is
anything.
bright.
Right.
I see it bright.
Enabler.
Enabler.
Exciting.
Actually, you took my word. Super exciting, but what I'll say one thing, it's very early. This thing is going to take time. Do you know how much OpenAI spends a day? Did anybody read that? No. That's $700,000 a day is what OpenAI is spending. Yes. So I think you have to be, you have to know that this is very, very early stage. It'll take time to go down the efficiency route. Also, there's some serious sustainability constraints. Let me give you another data point. Do you know how many tons of carbon dioxide is used, are generated by training one large LLM model?
The equivalent of 45,000 households' energy consumption in a year.
315 tons.
Yep.
Okay, so guys, we have a long ways to go. This is really early. I know it's all hyped up and everything like that. All your concerns are all legitimate. But, all the horse stable manufacturers, some of them became car mechanics.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So, we all have to evolve, and we have to be, and if you're going to be like, I don't mean to make it political at all, but what we have to avoid is the plight of the classic Trump voter in the US. Yeah. Right? They were sitting in the Midwest. They lost the manufacturing jobs. They did not reskill. They did not educate themselves to go to the next level. That's the plight that has to be avoided. That was not technology. That was technology related, right? But they could not cross that hump, right? So I think it's going to be a lot of work, but it's going to take time.
Okay. Thank you. And I think we are a minute over, but thank you so much.